Alongside the personal grief that all my family are feeling, we also share with so many of you in the United Kingdom.
When Queen Camilla quietly shifted a collection of Elizabeth II's private jewels into the hands of her own trusted relatives, she likely believed no one would notice. It was supposed to be one of those quiet, invisible gestures that stayed within palace walls forever, a moment wrapped in secrecy and silence. But what she didn't anticipate was that King Charles himself would discover the move, and what he did next would rattle not just his household, but the very monarchy itself. Because in the House of Windsor, nothing remains hidden forever. The monarchy is a place built on ritual, order, and unbroken chains of tradition. For centuries, every crown jewel, every robe, every letter written in the Queen's hand has carried the weight of history. And in that world, where the smallest breach of protocol can spark scandal, Camilla's discreet maneuver wasn't just about jewelry. It was about power, legacy, and ownership of the Queen's memory. Charles knew it. William sensed it. And soon, the entire palace would feel the aftershocks of what had begun as a seemingly minor act. The shock was not just that something had been moved, it was how it was discovered. Whispers began to drift through the palace corridors, whispers that personal treasures of the late Queen were no longer where they were supposed to be. What began as a faint rumor solidified into fact when Charles confronted the reports himself. He understood instantly that this wasn't a matter of misplaced heirlooms. This was about trust, betrayal, and the image of the monarchy in the eyes of the world. What followed was a chain of events so unexpected, so deeply unsettling, that those inside Buckingham Palace still struggled to speak of it openly. It wasn't simply about jewelry, or even about the late Queen's legacy. It was about control of history itself. And the moment Charles decided to act, the walls of the palace seemed to close in tighter, as though centuries of royal tradition were about to be rewritten in real time. Stay with us, because what unfolded from that first quiet act would become a scandal that shook the monarchy to its very foundations. Queen Elizabeth II's life had already been sealed into history as one of the most remarkable reigns the world had ever seen. For over 70 years, she had been the steady hand guiding a kingdom through wars, recessions, shifting governments, and global change. Her passing in September 2022 was mourned not only in Britain, but across the world. Heads of state bowed. Their heads, ordinary citizens, lined the streets for days, and millions tuned in to watch a funeral unlike any the nation had seen in living memory. For many, it was the end of an era, an unshakable presence gone, leaving behind questions about the monarchy's future. In the months that followed, Britain was wrapped in an atmosphere of grief. Black crape draped the gates of Buckingham Palace, flags flew at half-mast, and the sound of muffled bells marked the nation's mourning. But as the weeks turned into months, the machinery of the monarchy moved on, as it always does. The morning. Bands were taken off uniforms. The black bunting was folded away, and slowly, almost reluctantly, life inside the palace resumed. Charles took the throne, Camilla assumed her role as queen consort, and William and Kate stepped further into their responsibilities as the future face of the crown. Outwardly, order had returned, but grief is never so neatly packed away, and, within the hidden corners of the palace, shadows still lingered. Servants whispered about the Queen's presence, her familiar routines now replaced with silence. Some said the palace halls still carried her spirit, as though she were quietly watching over those who had inherited her crown. For Charles, the transition was particularly heavy. To step into the role he had waited for all his life meant both honoring his mother's legacy and finding his own voice as king, a balance that was never easy. And yet, beneath the surface of public rituals and carefully staged appearances, something far more troubling had begun to stir. The Queen's personal possessions, her jewelry, heirlooms, and handwritten journals, were supposed to be secured under lock and key, guarded as part of the royal collection. By tradition, these items were not just trinkets or family keepsakes. They were artifacts of national importance, sealed away for decades before any hand other than the Queen's could touch them again. That safeguard was meant to protect her. Legacy from interference. But, as Charles and the rest of the family would soon discover, not everything had gone according to plan. Someone, had already disturbed what was never meant to be touched. By royal decree, the late Queen's personal belongings were meant to remain untouched for nearly a century, held in trust under the royal collection and protected by strict statutes. This was not merely a matter of tradition, it was a safeguard for history itself. Every jewel, every document, every handwritten letter was catalogued and sealed, intended to remain a private reflection of a life dedicated to duty. The sapphire, brooch, pearl necklaces, personal diaries, all of it was locked away, inaccessible to all but a handful of the most trusted officers. The date for opening this treasure, historians agreed, was decades away. In theory, nothing could disturb it. In practice, of course, history has its own plans. On a seemingly ordinary Wednesday morning, the quiet hum of palace life was shattered by an unexpected visitor. Donald Walton, the royal treasurer, arrived unannounced, carrying a report that would send tremors through the monarchy. His face, pale and strained, betrayed the seriousness of his message before he even spoke a word. According to his records, a significant portion of Queen Elizabeth's personal items had disappeared. These were not simple artifacts or decorative items. They were irreplaceable pieces of history, intimately tied to the Queen's life, her reign, and her private thoughts. Among the missing pieces was the sapphire Jubilee brooch, a gift marking, her 65th year on the throne, worn during ceremonies attended by countless dignitaries and heads of state. Then there was the double-strand pearl necklace she had donned at Princess Diana's funeral, a symbol of solemnity that had become iconic in photographs across the world. Perhaps most alarmingly, 2 journals known only to a select few had vanished. These were not just diaries, they were personal chronicles of her darkest days, detailing moments of doubt, hope, and resilience during global crises, including the CO-19 lockdowns. Letters to her heirs, penned in secret, were also among the missing items, private counsel intended for family eyes alone. By the time Walton's report reached Prince William and Princess Anne, the palace was no longer calm. The air shifted, from routine to suspicion, from order to unease. A breach of this magnitude was unprecedented, even in the centuries-long history of the royal household. It wasn't merely a matter of theft, it was an affront to the Queen's memory, a violation of the very principles that had protected the monarchy for generations. The sense of urgency was immediate. The quiet corridors of Buckingham Palace, so accustomed to ceremonial routines, now thrummed with tension. This was more than a scandal. It was a mystery with ramifications far beyond missing treasures, one that could rewrite the story of the royal family itself. And in that moment, those within the palace walls realized that the calm facade of monarchy had been irrevocably broken. The report sent a shockwave through Buckingham Palace. What had begun as a quiet concern quickly escalated into a full-blown crisis. The treasurer, Donald Walton, who had spent years meticulously cataloging and safeguarding the Queen's belongings, was now the bearer of alarming news. Multiple items of immense historical and sentimental value had vanished. Among them were not only jewelry of staggering worth, but also intimate relics that carried the weight of Queen Elizabeth's personal history. The missing pieces were extraordinary in their significance. The sapphire Jubilee brooch, worn during her 65th anniversary on the throne, was more than an ornament. It was a symbol of endurance, a testament to decades of service under the global eye. Its absence was a striking signal that even the most protected artifacts were not beyond reach. Then there was the double-strand pearl necklace, forever associated with the Queen's solemn presence at Princess Diana's funeral. In photographs and memory, it had become inseparable from that pivotal moment in British history, and its disappearance struck deeply at the family's sense of security. Yet the greatest concern lay elsewhere. 2 handwritten journals, sealed and meant to remain, private for generations, had disappeared. These were not just records of public events. They contained the Queen's reflections during some of the darkest days of the CO-19 lockdowns, including letters to her heirs. Thoughts, fears, and counsel intended for family eyes alone now hung in the air like a threat. If they were released or misused, the impact would extend far beyond mere embarrassment. It could alter public perception of the monarchy itself. By the time the report reached Prince William and Princess Anne, urgency replaced routine. Calm courtyards and quiet corridors of Buckingham Palace gave way to whispered speculation. William, seated in his private office, ran his hand over his face, disbelief etched across his features. Anne, stern and measured, immediately recognized the stakes. This was no simple breach. It was a direct challenge to the integrity of the royal household, a potential scandal capable of igniting public outrage. The implications were staggering. This was a violation of trust at the highest level. Walton, usually precise and composed, appeared visibly shaken, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily upon him. The palace, so accustomed to order and ceremonial grace, was now a place of uncertainty. Questions swirled. Who could have done this? Was it an inside job? How had someone circumvented decades of safeguards and the most meticulous record-keeping the monarchy had ever employed? The answer, they would soon realize, was far more complex and far more dangerous than anyone could have anticipated. This was not simply about missing treasures. It was about the legacy of a queen, the security of a family, and the fragile balance between secrecy and power within the walls of Buckingham Palace. The first official confrontation was swift and tense. Prince William and Princess Anne, aware of the gravity of the situation, summoned Donald Walton to a secure briefing chamber, a room historically reserved for wartime strategy and urgent state decisions. The polished oak walls seemed to echo the seriousness of the moment, and as Walton entered, it was clear that this was no routine meeting. Anne, sitting upright with a posture of uncompromising authority, wasted no time. "Mr. Walton," she began, her voice steady but carrying an edge, "how long have these items been under your direct supervision?" Walton's hands fidgeted subtly as he adjusted his cufflinks. "Since September, Your Royal Highness," he replied, his voice betraying the tension he felt. All items were sealed, double-logged. Nothing was moved without proper documentation. William leaned forward, his piercing gaze fixed on Walton. "Then how do you explain the disappearance of the Queen's personal treasures?" The question hung in the air like a verdict waiting to be delivered. Walton swallowed hard. "Sir, I am at a loss. I can only assume there has been a deliberate breach. I swear, I will do everything in my power to determine who is responsible. I understand the magnitude of what has occurred." Anne's arms remained folded, her expression unreadable, yet her eyes revealed a sharp calculation. "This is not just about missing items," she said quietly. "It is about the integrity of the royal household and the protection of our mother's legacy. We cannot allow any lapse in judgment." William nodded, understanding the unspoken reality. This was a matter of trust, not just of missing artifacts. The breach could ripple beyond the palace walls, affecting public perception and igniting political and media scrutiny. The room was heavy with tension. Walton's calm, measured demeanor had cracked under the pressure, revealing the strain of managing the Queen's most treasured possessions. Every word he spoke was scrutinized, every pause interpreted as a possible clue to deeper complications. The weight of responsibility rested not only on his shoulders, but also on the historical trust he represented. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that formal investigations would need to begin immediately. Yet, within the palace walls, there was also the understanding that this inquiry could not be handled as usual. It required discretion, strategy, and an unprecedented level of secrecy. The palace, a place accustomed to public ceremonies and carefully managed appearances, had now become a theater of suspicion, where even the most loyal servants could be under scrutiny. The first confrontation had set the stage. Questions, doubt, and tension now hung in the corridors of Buckingham Palace, marking the beginning of a scandal that would test the family, the institution, and the very meaning of trust within the monarchy. When the news reached King Charles in his private study, the weight of the situation settled on him like a shadow. He rose slowly from his leather armchair, the blanket draped across his knees slipping silently to the floor. Pale as the morning light filtering through the tall windows, his face carried a steely resolve, the kind that only decades of preparing for the crown could forge. This was no longer about misplaced trinkets or a minor lapse in protocol. This was about the legacy of his mother, about the very honor of the monarchy itself. Charles summoned Donald Walton once more, this time to his private quarters. The treasurer's entrance was hesitant, aware that the king's presence alone conveyed a seriousness that went far beyond words. "Mr. Walton," Charles began, his voice quiet but firm, "you will do everything within your power to resolve this matter. But understand this. Any attempt to hide, soften, or politicize the situation will be regarded as a betrayal." Walton nodded, visibly shaken, understanding the enormity of the king's expectations. Charles's gaze lingered, assessing, weighing, and silently demanding absolute loyalty. "This is no longer a matter of missing items," Charles continued, pacing slowly. "It is about preserving history, protecting the truth, and safeguarding the family legacy. Every action from this point forward must be deliberate, precise, and unyielding." Once Walton departed, Charles remained in contemplation. The calm decor of the study contrasted sharply with the turmoil swirling within his mind. In the days since Elizabeth's passing, he had assumed the throne with the intention of stabilizing the monarchy, of honoring his mother's memory. Yet this breach, this apparent act of misappropriation, challenged everything he sought to protect. The stakes were higher than he had anticipated. The consequences could reach far beyond the palace walls. By evening, Charles made a decisive move. He convened a private council meeting with only the most trusted royals: Prince William, Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and Queen Camilla. At precisely 4 o'clock, they gathered in the Royal War Room, a place of historic strategy and confidential deliberation. The air was heavy with anticipation. Only essential staff were present, and even they were sworn to silence, bound by the weight of the monarchy's expectations. Charles opened the meeting with measured gravity. "The Queen's personal possessions have been tampered with," he stated flatly. "I want answers from within these walls, not from the press, not from public speculation. We will resolve this ourselves." The room fell into tense silence, the weight of history pressing down on every word. Every member present understood that this meeting could determine not only the fate of missing treasures, but the trajectory of the monarchy itself. The stakes had been raised, and the royal family now faced a dilemma that would test loyalty, judgment, and the unbreakable bond between history and those entrusted to preserve it. The royal war room was silent, but charged with tension, its historic walls seemingly absorbing the gravity of the situation. Prince William, Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and Queen Camilla took their seats around the imposing oak table, each aware that the decisions made in this room could define the monarchy for years to come. Outside, the palace carried on in its usual measured rhythm, but inside, time felt suspended, every second heavy with unspoken suspicion. Charles began the meeting with a controlled, deliberate tone. "The Queen's private possessions have been tampered with," he stated. "I want answers from us, not the press, not the courts, only from within this room. We must act swiftly, decisively, and with complete discretion." For a long moment, silence hung like a fog, broken only by the soft ticking of a grandfather clock. Then Camilla, seated to the king's right, spoke, her voice calm but precise. "Perhaps we should begin by considering the treasury itself," she suggested. "Mr. Walton may have had assistance, or motives we are not yet aware of." Prince Edward raised a brow. "Are you implying the treasurer was involved?" he asked, trying to mask his surprise. Camilla shook her head slightly. "I am only suggesting we cannot rule anything out. These items do not simply vanish. We must explore every possibility." William nodded slowly. "She has a point," he said. "If someone had help, we need to know. We cannot ignore this angle." Charles tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. "At his age," he murmured, "I do not believe Walton could have orchestrated this alone. But we must consider all possibilities, no matter how unlikely." Anne's voice, sharp and unwavering, cut through the speculation. "You are not suggesting we interrogate the royal treasurer publicly, are you? Not after what happened with Margaret Stafer in '89. A false accusation nearly ruined her life. No one in this household would dare steal even a pin. Accusing someone without evidence could ignite a scandal far worse than what we face now." Edward agreed, his tone measured. "We must tread carefully. The stakes are too high to risk a mistake. If this leaks, the public backlash could be catastrophic." The room fell into a heavy, contemplative silence, each member weighing their options, the history of the monarchy, and the fragility of trust within their family. Finally, Charles nodded, breaking the stillness. His decision was clear, and his tone left no room for debate. "We will allow the Treasury to run its internal investigation quietly," he stated, "but under royal authority, we will conduct our own parallel inquiry. No detail will be overlooked, no stone left unturned. The legacy of the Queen and the integrity of this family demands nothing less." The meeting concluded, but the tension did not dissipate. Each royal left with a weighty responsibility, knowing that their decisions in the coming days could either restore order or unravel the careful balance that had maintained the monarchy for generations. In that moment, the fate of history and the secrets of a queen's private life hung in precarious balance. As the royal council adjourned, a quiet tension lingered in the war room, like the calm before a storm. Each member understood the weight of what had just been decided. A dual investigation, one under the Treasury and one under direct royal supervision, would begin immediately. It was a strategy designed to safeguard the monarchy